I almost didn't tell anyone about this for a long time. Part of that was embarrassment. Part of it was that nothing technically happened to me. I wasn't attacked. Nothing was stolen. There was no police report that led anywhere. But I still think about it every time I smell bar soap in a bathroom that nobody has used. This was in late September a few years ago when I was still living in a small town in western Pennsylvania. I was 28 at the time, recently divorced, and trying to rebuild my life in a quiet way. I had started going back to the church I grew up in. Not every Sunday, but enough that people knew I was around again. It was one of those churches where everyone knows who is sick, who needs help moving, whose kid just left for college, and who has a spare key under a flower pot. That last part matters. There was a family there named the Whitakers. I knew them, but not closely. Mark and Elise Whitaker were in their early 40s. They had 2 kids, both in middle school. They were the kind of family that always seemed organized, but not in a showy way. The kids were polite. Elise helped run the nursery. Mark fixed things around the church without being asked. One Sunday after service, Elise came up to me in the hallway by the coat racks and asked if I would be willing to house sit for them. They were going to visit Mark's mother in North Carolina for a week. Apparently, she had been having some health issues and they didn't want the house sitting empty. They had a dog, but he was going with them. So really, all I had to do was bring in the mail, water the plants, keep an eye on things, and stay there at night. I worked remotely doing medical billing, so it wasn't hard for me to say yes. Elise seemed relieved. She told me they had used a neighbor in the past, but the neighbor was out of town that week. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, that it would make her feel better knowing someone from church was there. I remember that phrase, someone from church. Like that automatically meant safe. They lived about 12 minutes from me, in a split-level house on a quiet road outside town. Not isolated, exactly, but spread out enough that you couldn't see much of the next house through the trees. When I got there Monday afternoon, Elise walked me through everything. The house was clean, but lived in. School papers on the counter. Shoes by the garage door. A calendar on the fridge with color-coded appointments. There were family photos in the hallway and a ceramic cross over the kitchen sink. She showed me the thermostat, the Wi-Fi password, the plants, and the upstairs guest room. I told her I was fine sleeping there, but she made a face and said the mattress was old and lumpy. Then she said I could use the couch in the living room if I wanted. It was a big sectional with a chaise on one end, and honestly, it did look more comfortable than the guest bed. She gave me the front door key and showed me how to lock the deadbolt. There was also a side entrance, off the driveway, that opened into a little mudroom. That door had a separate key, but she said I wouldn't need it. I asked if anyone else had keys. She paused for maybe half a second. Then she said, "My sister has one, and Mark's brother, and I think our old cleaning lady still has one, but she hasn't been here in months." That didn't seem strange to me. In a town like that, half the people I knew had keys to somebody else's house. Before she left, she told me to help myself to coffee and anything in the fridge. She said the downstairs bathroom was usually for guests and the kids, and the upstairs bathroom off the hallway had better water pressure. That was the one I used. They left Monday evening around 6. The first night was uneventful. I made pasta, watched a couple episodes of a show on my laptop, and fell asleep on the couch around 11. The house made normal noises. The refrigerator clicked on. A branch scraped the gutter once or twice. Nothing that made me feel uneasy. The next morning, Tuesday, I woke up just after 7. I remember that because I didn't have an alarm set. The room was gray and quiet, and for a second I forgot where I was. I folded my blanket, put the pillow back on the couch, and walked toward the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I smelled soap. Not air freshener, not laundry detergent. Soap. Plain, clean, bar soap. The smell was coming from the downstairs bathroom, which was in a short hallway between the living room and the mudroom. The door was slightly open. I glanced in as I passed. Nothing looked strange. Sink was dry. Toilet seat down. Towel hanging neatly from the ring by the sink. A small wrapped bar of soap sat on a dish. I assumed maybe the smell carried differently in the morning. Maybe someone had recently cleaned. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it the night before. I used the upstairs bathroom, made coffee, worked most of the day at the kitchen table, and didn't think about it again. That night, I locked the front door, checked the back door, and made sure the sliding glass door in the dining area was latched. The side entrance was locked too, at least from what I could tell. It had one of those locks where you turn the little knob on the inside. I slept on the couch again. Wednesday morning, I woke up before 6. The house was still dark. I lay there for a minute listening. I didn't hear anything, but I had that mild, uncomfortable awareness you get when you wake up somewhere that isn't yours. I got up, put on my cardigan, and walked toward the kitchen. Again, I smelled soap. This time it was stronger. I stopped in the hallway and looked into the downstairs bathroom. The towel by the sink was hanging there, but the bottom edge looked slightly twisted, like someone had used it and put it back in a hurry. I stood there for a moment. Then I touched it. It was damp. Not soaked, not dripping, just damp enough that I felt it on my fingers. I remember pulling my hand back and staring at it like I expected some explanation to appear. My first thought was plumbing. Maybe the sink was leaking. Maybe condensation was collecting somehow. Maybe one of the kids had left it damp before they left, and it just hadn't dried. But that didn't make sense. It had been dry the day before, or at least I thought it had been. I checked under the sink, no puddles. The faucet was off. The counter was dry. The floor was dry. I smelled my fingers. Soap. I washed my hands upstairs and tried to tell myself it was nothing. For the rest of that day, I paid more attention. I left the downstairs bathroom door all the way open. I checked the towel before bed. It was dry. I checked the sink. Dry. I even took a picture of the towel with my phone, not because I thought I would need proof, but because I didn't like feeling unsure of myself. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up and looking toward the hallway. At around 3, I thought I heard a soft click somewhere in the house, not a footstep, not a voice, just a click. But houses click, heating systems click, refrigerators click, old pipes click. I stayed on the couch and listened until I fell back asleep. Thursday morning, I woke up around 7:30. There it was again. Soap. I went straight to the downstairs bathroom. The towel was dry. That almost made me feel worse. I had expected it to be damp again, and I was ready to be upset about that. But because it wasn't, I felt silly. Like I had built something up in my head over a bathroom towel. I made coffee and went outside to bring in the trash bins from the curb. When I came back around the side of the house, I noticed something in the grass by the back patio. Boot prints. Not clear, perfect prints. Just impressions in the damp grass and mud near the flower bed. The kind of marks you might not notice unless you were already looking for something. The house had a sliding glass door off the dining area that led to a small concrete patio. Beyond that was a patchy lawn and a line of trees. The prints were near the patio, pointing toward the house. I stood there holding the trash bin handle and looked around. There was nobody. The yard backed up to trees and then a narrow service road that ran behind several properties. People sometimes walked dogs back there. Kids used it as a cut-through. Mark had told me that. So again, I found a way to explain it. Someone had walked through. Maybe a utility worker. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe the prints were old and I just noticed them now. Still, when I went back inside, I locked the sliding door and checked the little wooden stick in the track. It was there. That afternoon, I texted Elise. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I kept it casual. I wrote, "Hey, quick question. Does anyone come by the house during the week? Yard guy, cleaner, anything like that?" She replied about an hour later, "No, not this week. Why?" I stared at that for a bit before answering. I didn't want to say, because your bathroom smells like someone is washing their hands before I wake up. So I wrote, "Just checking. I saw some tracks by the patio and wasn't sure." She answered, "Probably deer or the neighbor's boys. Thanks for keeping an eye out." That should have been the end of it, but that night, I moved my things from the couch to the upstairs guest room. I told myself it was because the couch was starting to hurt my neck. Really, I didn't like sleeping so close to that downstairs hallway. The guest room was at the top of the stairs, across from the kids' rooms. It had a small window facing the driveway and side entrance. The bed was uncomfortable, like Elise had warned me, but I felt better being upstairs. Before bed, I did a full walkthrough. Front door locked, back sliding door locked. kitchen windows locked, mudroom side entrance locked. I checked the downstairs bathroom towel, dry. Then I turned off the lights and went upstairs. I woke up around 2:30 to a sound outside. It was faint, a scrape maybe. I sat up in bed and listened. At first, nothing. Then another small sound, like gravel shifting under weight. The guest room window had blinds, but they were tilted slightly open. I got out of bed slowly and looked down at the driveway. The porch light by the side entrance was on. I had left it on. At the bottom edge of the window, just below the sill, I saw a pair of boots. Only for maybe 2 seconds. Work boots. Brown or dark tan. The toes were facing the side door. Then they moved backward and disappeared from view. I did not scream. I did not run downstairs. I just stood there, frozen in a very quiet way. My phone was on the bed behind me. I picked it up and called my brother. He lived 40 minutes away, but he was the first person I thought of. He answered half asleep, annoyed at first, until he heard my voice. I whispered that I thought someone was outside. He told me to call the police. I said I didn't know if someone was actually there now. He said, call them anyway. So I did. The dispatcher stayed on the line while an officer came out. It took about 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt much longer, but nothing happened during them. I heard no glass break, no doors open, no footsteps inside the house. When the officer arrived, he checked around outside with a flashlight. I watched from the upstairs window while he walked around the driveway, patio, and side yard. Then he knocked on the front door and I let him in. He was polite, but I could tell he didn't expect to find anything. He checked the locks. He looked at the side entrance. He walked through the downstairs and asked if anything was missing. Nothing was. I showed him the bathroom towel. It was still dry. I told him about the soap smell and the damp towel from Wednesday. I heard how it sounded as I said it. He took it seriously enough, but not seriously. He said there were no obvious signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged locks. He did see marks in the gravel by the side door, but he said that could be anyone. He asked if the family had given keys to anyone. I told him what Elise had told me. Her sister, Mark's brother, maybe an old cleaning lady. He nodded and said it might be worth having the homeowners change the locks when they got back. Then he left. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the upstairs guest room with the lamp on until morning. Friday was the 5th morning. I know because I had counted the nights in my head. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They were supposed to be back Sunday afternoon. By then I was exhausted and embarrassed. Around 5 in the morning I decided I was being ridiculous. The police had come. Nothing had happened. The house was locked. The family trusted me to stay there, and I didn't want to call Elise in North Carolina and make her worry over something I couldn't prove. I went downstairs just before dawn. The sky outside the kitchen windows was starting to lighten, but the house was still dim. I didn't turn on the main lights, just the small lamp beside the couch. I planned to make coffee and start work early. I had slept upstairs, but I had left my blanket and pillow folded on the couch from before. My laptop bag was on the floor next to it. Anyone looking at the living room would know someone had been sleeping there. I went into the kitchen and filled the coffee maker. As it started to drip, I smelled soap again. That same clean, plain smell from the downstairs bathroom. I stood by the counter and listened. The house was very still. Then I heard a key in the side entrance. Not a bump, not the sound of wind. A key. It went into the lock, turned, and the door opened. I was standing just inside the kitchen, near the corner where I could see down the short hallway into the mudroom if I leaned a little. I didn't lean. I stepped back behind the wall, next to the pantry. The side door opened with a soft scrape against the threshold. Then I heard one careful step inside, then another. A man came in. He was wearing a uniform, not a police uniform, not military. More like a maintenance uniform. Dark pants, dark jacket, name patch or company patch on the chest. I couldn't read it from where I was standing. He was maybe in his 40s or 50s. Average height. He had a knit cap pulled low, and he carried himself like someone trying not to make noise but also not rushing. He closed the side door behind him. Then he stood in the mudroom for a few seconds. He looked toward the downstairs bathroom. Then he looked into the living room. His eyes stopped on the couch, on the folded blanket, on the pillow, on my laptop bag. I don't know if he saw me. I was partly behind the wall but not completely hidden. If he had turned his head a few more inches, he would have. He stared at the couch for maybe 3 seconds. Then, very quietly, he said, "They told me nobody would be here." He said it like he was talking to himself, not surprised exactly, more irritated, like he had been given bad information. I backed away into the kitchen and picked up my phone from the counter. My hands were shaking enough that I almost dropped it. The man heard something. Maybe the phone case tapping the counter. Maybe my sleeve brushing the cabinet. He turned toward the kitchen. For 1 second, we looked at each other. His expression changed, but not the way I expected. He didn't look panicked. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. Then he raised one hand, palm out, like he was telling me to stay calm. I didn't. I ran. Not toward him, not toward the front door. I ran up the stairs, locked myself in the guest bedroom, pushed the dresser halfway in front of the door, and called 911. This time, I didn't whisper. I told the dispatcher there was a man inside the house. While I was on the phone, I heard movement downstairs. Not running, not crashing, just normal walking. A cabinet opened and closed. Then the side door opened again, then shut. After that, nothing. The police arrived faster that time. 2 officers. They searched the house and the yard. The man was gone. The side entrance was locked. That detail bothered one of the officers. I could see it in his face when he tried the knob from outside and then looked back at his partner. Whoever he was, he had used a key to get in. And either he had locked it behind him when he left, or the lock had caught automatically. I don't remember which. I just remember the officer asking me 3 different times if I was sure I had heard a key. I was sure. They asked me to describe him. I did the best I could. White male, middle-aged. Work uniform, dark jacket, knit cap, brown boots, no visible weapon, no bag. They checked the downstairs bathroom. The towel by the sink was damp. The soap was wet. There was a single dark hair on the edge of the sink that was too short to be mine. One officer took photos with his phone. The other asked if I had touched anything. I told him not that morning. They asked again about who had keys. This time, I called Elise while the officers were there. She answered, sounding tired and worried. I told her what happened. There was silence on her end. Then she asked if the kids were okay, which didn't make sense because the kids were with her. I think she was just scared. I put the officer on the phone. He asked her to list everyone who might have a key. This time the list was longer. Her sister, Mark's brother, the old cleaning lady, a former dog sitter, a handyman who had done work on the basement bathroom 2 years earlier, a man from their old landscaping company, someone from the church who used to pick up donations from their garage. Maybe one of Mark's coworkers, because they had borrowed tools back and forth. The officer wrote things down. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the coffee maker, which had finished brewing at some point during all of this. It made the kitchen smell normal, coffee and dust and morning air. But underneath it I could still smell soap. Elise and Mark came home that afternoon. They didn't wait until Sunday. By the time they arrived, I had packed all my things and was sitting on the front porch with my keys in my lap. Elise hugged me when she got there. She cried a little. Mark looked angry, but not at me. He kept asking the officers questions they couldn't answer. They changed the locks that same day. A locksmith came out around 4. I remember sitting in my car across the street because I didn't want to go back inside. A few days later, Elise called me. She said they had gone through old texts, emails, invoices, everything they could think of. They contacted the former handyman, the landscaping company, the cleaning lady, and the dog sitter. Everyone denied going there. Most of them seemed genuinely confused. The landscaping company said no one had worked that route in over a year. The handyman said he had moved to Ohio. The cleaning lady was elderly and living with her daughter. Mark's brother said his key was still on his key ring. Elise's sister said the same. Nobody knew who had told the man the house would be empty. That was the part that stayed with me. Not that he got in. Keys get copied. People forget who has them. Locks don't get changed when they should. What stayed with me was the sentence. They told me nobody would be here. Not, I'm sorry, wrong house. Not, I thought this was my job. Not, I was told to come by. They told me nobody would be here. Like there were other people involved. Like he had been given a time, a place, and a condition. And the condition was that the house would be empty. The police never found him. At least, not that I know of. They told me there wasn't much to go on. No security cameras, no license plate, no clear company name on the uniform, no forced entry, no theft, no assault. They took the damp towel and the soap wrapper, but I never heard anything about that either. For a while, people at church talked about it in the vague way church people talk about frightening things. They said how thankful they were that I was safe. They said God had protected me. They said it was probably someone casing houses in the area. Maybe it was, but I stopped going there not long after. That might sound unfair. Nobody at the church did anything to me, not that I could prove. Still, every time someone smiled at me and asked if I was doing okay, I wondered if they knew more than they were saying. I wondered who knew the Whitakers were leaving. I wondered who knew they had found a house sitter. I wondered who didn't know. A month later, Elise texted me that they had installed cameras and an alarm system. She said nothing else had happened. I was glad for her, but it didn't make me feel better. Because nothing else needed to happen. Someone had already been inside that house at least twice before I saw him, maybe 3 times. He had used the bathroom, washed his hands, dried them on the towel, left before I woke up. He had stood outside the back door in those boots, close enough for me to see them from the upstairs window. And on that 5th morning he had walked in with a key before sunrise, expecting the house to be empty. I still don't know what he planned to do. Maybe steal something. Maybe meet someone. Maybe just use the place. Maybe something worse. I try not to fill in the blanks, because the blanks are bad enough. For a long time after that, I couldn't sleep in the living room of any house, even my own apartment. If I woke up and smelled soap from the bathroom, I would get up and check the towels. I still do sometimes, and whenever someone says they're leaving a key for a neighbor, or a cleaner, or a friend from church, I think about that side door. I think about the sound of the key turning. I think about the way he looked at my blanket on the couch. And I think about what he said, not loudly, not threatening me, just quietly, like I was the inconvenience. They told me nobody would be here. I house sat for the Millers for 8 days in late September. They weren't close friends of mine. I knew them through my mother. My mom worked with Karen Miller at a dental office, and when Karen mentioned that she and her husband were taking their 2 kids to Florida for a week, my mom suggested me. At the time, I was 24, living in a small apartment over a garage, and working part-time at a print shop while finishing a certification course online. I had watched houses before, mostly for relatives, water plants, bring in mail, feed a dog or a cat, nothing complicated. The Millers lived about 15 minutes outside town, in a quiet neighborhood where every house looked like it had been built by the same contractor in the late 90s. 2-story homes, attached garages, small front porches, mailboxes with the house numbers printed on both sides. Their house sat near the end of a cul-de-sac, with woods behind it and a drainage ditch running along one side of the property. It wasn't isolated. Not really. There were neighbors on both sides, but at night, it got very quiet back there. The main reason they needed someone to stay over was the cat. His name was Milo. He was an older gray cat with one cloudy eye and a habit of crying if he couldn't find a person in the house. Karen told me he had separation anxiety, which sounded strange for a cat, but after spending one night with him, I understood what she meant. He followed me everywhere. If I shut a door between us, he would sit on the other side and make this low, broken sound until I opened it again. Karen left me a printed sheet on the kitchen counter. Feed Milo half a can in the morning, half a can at night. Scoop the litter box every other day. Trash day was Thursday. Recycling was every other week, but not that week. Water the hanging fern on the back patio. Keep the guest bedroom door open. That last line was underlined. When Karen showed me around before they left, she pointed down the upstairs hallway and said, Milo likes that room. He sleeps on the bed during the day. If it's shut, he'll scratch the carpet. The guest room was the smallest bedroom upstairs. It was at the far end of the hallway, across from a linen closet. There was a queen bed with a blue comforter, a small dresser, a lamp, and one window facing the backyard. No TV, no clutter. It looked like a room that nobody really used. Karen pushed the door fully open with her foot and said, "Just leave it like that." I said I would. The Millers left the next morning. I came by after work, around 6, and found the house exactly how they'd left it. I brought a backpack, my laptop, 2 changes of clothes, and some groceries I didn't need because Karen had told me to help myself to anything. That first night was uneventful. I fed Milo. I ate frozen pizza. I watched a baseball game on low volume in the living room. Then I slept in the main bedroom, like Karen said I should. She had changed the sheets before they left. It felt a little weird sleeping in someone else's bed, but it was more comfortable than the couch. The next morning I got up around 7. Milo was sitting at the bedroom door waiting for me. I went downstairs, fed him, made coffee, and did my online coursework at the kitchen table. At some point I went upstairs to get my charger. That was when I noticed the guest bedroom door was closed. Not latched all the way, just closed enough that there was only a thin line of darkness between the door and the frame. I remember stopping for a second because I had definitely left it open. Then I shrugged it off. Old house. Air pressure. Cat. Whatever. I opened it again and made sure it was pushed all the way back until the knob touched the rubber stopper on the wall. Milo walked in right behind me, jumped onto the bed, turned in a circle and sat down. That was it. I didn't think about it again. The second morning, the same thing happened. I went upstairs after breakfast and the guest bedroom door was closed. This time it was fully latched. I tried the knob and heard Milo crying from inside. When I opened the door, he darted out so fast he almost ran into my foot. There were scratch marks in the carpet near the inside of the door, but they looked old. I checked the window. Locked. I checked the closet. Empty except for a vacuum hose and a box of Christmas decorations. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, looking at the door. It was one of those lightweight hollow doors and the hinges didn't feel loose. When I opened it halfway and let go, it stayed there. When I opened it all the way, it stayed there too. I even tried walking past it a few times to see if the air movement would pull it shut. Nothing happened. So I blamed Milo. I figured maybe he rubbed against it or pushed it with his body. He was old, but he was still a cat. Cats do things you don't see. That's what I told myself. The third day, I had off from work, so I was in the house most of the time. I kept the guest room door open. I noticed it more that day because I was already thinking about it. Every time I went upstairs, I looked down the hallway. Open, open. Open by 9 that night. It was still open. Milo had been sleeping on the guest bed most of the evening. Around 11, I brushed my teeth and went to bed in the main bedroom. Before going in, I looked down the hall one more time. The guest room door was open. The hallway nightlight was on. Milo was curled up on the blue comforter. I remember seeing his cloudy eye reflecting the little bit of light. I went into the main bedroom and left that door cracked because Milo liked to come in and out. The next morning, the guest room door was shut again. Milo was outside it, sitting in the hallway, staring at the door. Not crying. Just sitting there. That bothered me more than the crying. I opened the door and looked inside. The room was normal. The bed was made the way it had been. The window was locked. The closet was still empty. I opened the door all the way and pushed it hard against the stopper. Then I stood in the hallway and watched it for a while. Nothing. I called Karen that afternoon. Not because I was scared. At least that's not what I told myself. I called because I didn't want Milo tearing up the carpet. Karen answered from what sounded like a restaurant. There was music and people talking behind her. I told her everything was fine, but the guest bedroom door kept closing. She laughed a little and said, "Oh, that's weird. Maybe the air conditioning does it." I said maybe Then I asked if the hinges were uneven or if it was always doing that. She said, "Not that I know of." Then one of her kids started asking her something, and the conversation moved on. She thanked me again and said they'd be back Sunday night. After that call, I felt a little stupid. It was a door, just a door in someone else's house. I decided I was paying too much attention to it because I was alone. That night, I put a small shoe in front of the guest room door, one of my own sneakers. I didn't wedge it hard under the door. I just placed it against the bottom so the door couldn't swing closed without pushing it. I remember doing it in this slightly irritated way, like I was proving something to myself. In the morning, the door was closed. The sneaker had been moved about 2 feet down the hallway, not tossed, not flipped over, just slid away from the door. It was sitting neatly along the baseboard, toe pointing toward the stairs. I stared at it for a long time, then I opened the guest room. Milo wasn't inside. He was behind me near the top of the stairs. Again, he was just watching. I checked the room more carefully that time. Under the bed, inside the dresser drawers, behind the curtains, the window lock, the screen. Nothing was disturbed. I went downstairs and checked both exterior doors. Front door locked. Back slider locked with the metal security bar still in place. Garage door shut. Door from garage to kitchen locked. I checked the basement too. It wasn't a finished basement, just concrete floor, furnace, water heater, storage shelves, and some plastic bins. I hated being down there. Not because anything happened. It just had that smell unfinished basements have. Dust, damp concrete, old cardboard, but there was nowhere for anyone to hide. At least nowhere obvious. By then I was uncomfortable enough that I almost packed my bag and left. But I didn't. That's one of the parts I still feel embarrassed about. When people hear stories like this, they always say they would have left immediately. Maybe they would have. I didn't. I told myself there had to be an explanation. And if I called Karen and said I was leaving because a bedroom door closed by itself, I would sound ridiculous. So I stayed. That afternoon, I went to work. I made sure every door was locked before I left. I left the guest bedroom door open again, but this time I took a photo of it with my phone. It felt silly, but I did it. Door open. Hallway light off. Milo in the frame, walking away. When I got back at around 6:30, I went straight upstairs. The guest bedroom door was open. The sneaker was still by the baseboard. Everything was exactly as I had left it. That actually made me feel better. I fed Milo, ate dinner, and tried to relax. Around 8, I went upstairs to shower. The guest door was still open. After the shower, still open. At 10, still open. By 11:30, I was tired and honestly a little relieved. I stood in the hallway for a moment and said out loud, "There, done." I don't know why I said that. Maybe because I wanted the house to feel normal again. I left the door open and went to bed. Sometime in the night, I woke up. I don't know the exact time. The room was dark, except for the thin white light coming through the blinds from a street lamp outside. For a few seconds, I didn't know what had woken me. Then I heard it again. A soft, metallic sound downstairs. Not loud, not like someone forcing anything, more like a key going into a lock. I sat up. The house went quiet. Then I heard the front door open. Just a little. The faint shift of the weather seal. Then the soft click of it closing. A pause. Then the deadbolt turning back into place. Very slowly, very carefully. I didn't move. I was in the Miller's bedroom with the door cracked open, maybe 3 inches. My phone was on the nightstand, but for a few seconds I couldn't make myself reach for it. I kept thinking it was one of the Millers. Maybe their flight changed. Maybe Karen forgot to tell me, but there was no suitcase sound. No voices. No hello? No normal sounds of a family coming home. Just quiet. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow. One step at a time. The stairs in that house creaked in 2 places. The person knew to avoid the first creak. I remember that very clearly. The first few steps made almost no sound. Then one board near the middle gave a small pop. The footsteps stopped. They waited. then continued. My mouth was so dry I had trouble swallowing. I picked up my phone. The screen lit up too bright, and I immediately turned it down against the blanket. It was 2:17 in the morning. I had no missed calls, no texts from Karen. I opened the phone app but didn't dial yet. I still don't know why. Part of me was afraid that if I spoke, whoever was in the hallway would know exactly where I was. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then they moved down the hallway, not toward the main bedroom. That was the strange part. They passed the bathroom, passed the linen closet, then stopped outside the guest room. The door was open. I knew it was open. I had left it open. There was a long pause. Then I heard the guest room door move, a faint sound from the hinges, then the soft click of the latch. I sat there in bed with my phone in my hand, staring at the crack in the bedroom door. I expected the footsteps to come back down the hall. They didn't. For at least a minute, there was nothing. Then I heard one single sound from inside the guest room, a low creak, like someone sitting on the edge of the bed. That was when I called 911, I whispered. I told the dispatcher I was house-sitting and someone had come into the house. She asked if I could leave. I said no. I didn't want to open the bedroom door because the hallway was between me and the stairs. She told me to stay where I was, lock the door if I could do it quietly, and keep the line open. The bedroom door had one of those small push-button locks, not a real lock. Still, I got out of bed as slowly as I could and pressed it in. The click sounded incredibly loud. Nothing happened. No footsteps. No movement. The dispatcher stayed on the line. She asked me for the address. I gave it to her twice because I messed up the street name the first time. Then we waited. I sat on the floor on the far side of the bed, between the mattress and the wall. Milo wasn't in the room. That bothered me too. He had been sleeping near my feet when I went to bed. Now I had no idea where he was. The police arrived fast, but it felt like a long time. I saw the red and blue lights first, sliding across the ceiling through the blinds. Then there was pounding on the front door. A man's voice yelling, "Police department." I heard movement in the hallway then, not running, not heavy, just a quick shift, like someone standing up too fast. Then nothing. The dispatcher told me officers were outside and to stay put until they reached me. I heard the front door open downstairs. The police came in loud. They called out. They cleared the first floor. Then the stairs. Then the hallway. When they knocked on the bedroom door and said my name, I nearly couldn't stand. I opened it. There were 2 officers with flashlights. One stayed with me. The other went into the guest room. I remember hearing him say, "Clear," just like that. Clear. The house was empty. At least that's what they told me. They checked upstairs. They checked closets. They checked under beds. They checked the basement. They checked the garage. They walked around outside with flashlights. No one was there. No broken window. No forced entry. No muddy footprints. No open door. The front door was locked when they arrived, but Karen had given me a key, and the officers said if someone else had a key, there would be no sign of forced entry. One of them asked who else had access. I said I didn't know. The family, obviously. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe a relative. Maybe someone who had worked on the house. I called Karen. It was almost 3 in the morning. She answered after the second call, groggy and panicked once she understood what I was saying. She said they were still in Florida. She said no one should be in the house. She asked if the kids' rooms were okay. Then she asked about Milo. I hadn't seen him since before the police came upstairs. We found him in the laundry room, behind a basket of towels. He wouldn't come out until I shook the food container. The officers took my statement. They were professional, but I could tell they didn't know what to make of it. One of them said it might have been a previous owner or someone with an old key. He suggested the Millers change the locks. He also said it was possible I had heard something outside and mistaken it for the door. He wasn't rude about it. But when someone says that to you at 3 in the morning, after you've been sitting on the floor whispering to a dispatcher, it doesn't help. Before they left, I asked them to look at the guest room one more time. I don't know what I expected. There was no person in there, no hidden access panel. No closet full of old clothes. Nothing. But the guest bed looked different. The blue comforter was pulled back on one side. Not a lot, just enough that it looked like someone had been sitting there or lying down for a short time, and at the foot of the bed was a folded blanket. A gray fleece blanket. I recognized it immediately because I had seen it the day before in the linen closet across the hall. I had opened that closet looking for toilet paper. The blanket had been on the second shelf, folded under two white towels. Now it was on the guest bed. Folded neatly, not thrown, not dragged. Folded into a rectangle and placed at the foot of the bed, like someone had prepared the room for themselves. I told the officers that. They looked at the blanket. Then they looked in the linen closet. The two white towels were still on the shelf, but they were slightly crooked, with an empty space beneath them. One officer asked if I could have moved it and forgotten. I said no. He nodded, but not like he believed me, more like he was making a note of what I said. They stayed another 10 minutes. Then they left. I did not sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with every light on, holding a kitchen knife I knew I probably wouldn't be able to use. At sunrise, I packed my things and called Karen again. I told her I was sorry, but I couldn't stay another night. She said she understood. She sounded scared, but also distant, like she was trying to keep from scaring her kids. Her brother came over around 9 in the morning to take over until they got back. He was a big guy named Mark. He walked through the house with a baseball bat and kept saying, "That's messed up." He changed the locks that afternoon. I know because Karen texted me a picture of the new deadbolt and thanked me for taking it seriously. I thought that would be the end of it. For a while, it was. I didn't talk about it much. My mom asked me what happened, and I gave her the short version. She said Karen had been shaken up, but the family was okay. That was all that really mattered. About 2 weeks later, Karen called me. She said she had a question, and I could tell from her voice that she didn't want to ask it. She wanted to know if I had used the guest bathroom while I was there. I told her no. There was a bathroom attached to the main bedroom, so I had only used that one. She got quiet. Then she said when they got home, after I left, she noticed the guest bathroom trash can had something in it. A paper towel, a floss pick, and an empty wrapper from a travel-size bar of soap, not theirs. She said the soap wrapper was the kind hotels leave next to a sink. The guest bathroom had been cleaned before they left. She was sure of it. Then she told me something else. The guest room window was locked from the inside, but the screen had been bent at one corner. Not enough to notice unless you were looking closely. Her husband found it when he was checking all the windows after the locksmith left. It was on the back side of the house, facing the woods. They couldn't say whether it was new. It might have been like that for months. It might have been from a branch. It might have been from one of the kids, but Karen didn't think so. The police came back and took another report, but nothing ever came of it. There were no cameras, no fingerprints that meant anything, no missing jewelry, no stolen electronics, nothing taken. That was the part everyone kept coming back to. If someone had been in the house, why didn't they steal anything? Why keep closing the guest bedroom door? Why fold a blanket? Why come in so quietly and go upstairs like they knew the layout? I've asked myself those questions many times. I don't have good answers. The simplest explanation is probably the worst one. Someone had access to that house before I ever got there. Maybe they had a key. Maybe they had learned how to get in through that guest room window. Maybe they'd been using the room when the family was away or when no one noticed. I don't think they expected me to be there. Or maybe they did. I don't know. I think about the footsteps sometimes. How they didn't come toward the main bedroom. How they stopped at the guest room, like that was where they had always meant to go. I think about Milo sitting outside the closed door in the mornings, not crying anymore, just watching it. I think about the sneaker moved neatly against the wall, and I think about the folded gray blanket. That part still bothers me the most. Because closing a door can be explained. A cat can push things. A house can make noises. A tired person can misunderstand sounds in the dark, but a blanket does not take itself out of a linen closet. It doesn't move across a hallway. It doesn't fold itself and wait on a bed. The Millers sold the house the next spring. Karen told my mom it was because her husband got a better job closer to the city. Maybe that was true. I never asked. I didn't want to make her talk about it again. A few months after they moved, I drove through that neighborhood on my way to somewhere else. I didn't plan to pass the house, but once I realized I was close, I took the turn into the cul-de-sac. There was a different car in the driveway. A plastic slide in the front yard, new curtains in the upstairs windows. For some reason, I slowed down when I passed. Not stopped, just slowed. The guest bedroom window was visible from the street if you knew which one it was. Second floor, far right. Facing a little toward the side yard. The curtain was closed, but as I drove by, I saw a narrow gap in the middle of it. Just a dark line. Nothing more. I told myself it was normal. Curtains don't always hang flat. People leave gaps. There was probably a kid in that room now. Or a home office. Or boxes that hadn't been unpacked. I drove away and didn't go back. I still house sit sometimes, but not overnight. And whenever I stay anywhere that isn't mine, the first thing I do is check every bedroom door. I open them. I close them. I see how they move. I check the closets. I check the windows. Then, before I go to sleep, I put something in front of the door. Not because I think it would stop anyone. It wouldn't. I know that. I do it because I want to know. I want to know if something has moved while I was asleep. I want to know if I'm alone. And if a door is open when I go to bed, I need it to still be open in the morning. I've been dog sitting for about 6 years. Not professionally at first. It started with people from work, then friends of friends, then a few families in the neighborhood who traveled often and didn't like boarding their dogs. I never advertised much. I had a simple profile on one of those pet sitting apps, but most of my jobs came through word of mouth. I'm saying that because by the time this happened, I wasn't new to staying in other people's houses. I knew the usual awkward things, where people hid their spare towels, which doors stuck, which dogs were fine during the day but got nervous after dark, which homeowners said, "Make yourself at home," but clearly didn't mean it. I was careful. I cleaned up after myself. I kept doors locked. I didn't snoop, and I always asked the same questions before taking a job. Who has access to the house? Is anyone expected to stop by? Are there cameras inside? Do you have any neighbors I should know about? Most people appreciated it. Some people laughed, like I was being too formal, but I had learned that it was better to ask up front than be surprised later. The house was in a quiet suburb about 40 minutes from where I lived. It wasn't fancy, exactly, but it was one of those older two-story houses that had clearly been maintained by people who cared. Dark brick, white shutters. A small porch with 2 chairs and a pot of dead lavender near the steps. The couple who hired me were named Mark and Denise. They were probably in their early 60s. Polite, organized, a little distracted because they were leaving the next morning for a wedding in North Carolina. They had one dog, a 10-year-old yellow lab named Henry. Henry was the reason I agreed to stay there instead of just doing drop-ins. He had arthritis in his back legs and needed help with the short set of steps off the deck. He also took pills twice a day, wrapped in deli turkey. Mark showed me the medication schedule on a printed sheet that was stuck to the fridge with a magnet. Denise showed me where the towels were, where the cleaning supplies were, and how to work the thermostat, even though it was May and the house didn't really need heat or air. They both seemed normal. That was part of what made everything harder to process afterward. During the walkthrough, I asked my usual question. Is anyone expected to come by while you're gone? Mark looked at Denise. Denise said, "Our son might stop by." She said it casually, like she had just remembered. I asked, "Okay, what's his name?" There was a tiny pause. Not enough to be strange at the time. Just enough that I noticed it. Mark answered, "He probably won't, but he might." Denise added, "He still has a few things in the garage." I waited for more. Neither of them gave me more, so I asked, "Does he have a key?" Mark said, "Yes." I asked, "Should I expect him at a certain time?" Denise shook her head. "No. He usually texts first, but sometimes he doesn't. If he comes, he'll just be in and out." I should have pushed harder. I usually would have. But they were standing there with suitcases half packed in the hallway, and Henry was leaning against my leg, and it didn't feel like a big deal. Adult kids stop by their parents' houses all the time. People are vague about family. It isn't always suspicious. Before I left that first visit, Denise wrote down both of their cell numbers, the vet's number, the Wi-Fi password, and the garage code. She told me I could sleep in the guest room upstairs, but most sitters preferred the couch, because Henry liked to sleep in the living room. Then she handed me a house key on a small metal ring. It had a blue plastic tag on it that said back door. I remember that detail clearly. I got there around 5 the next evening, after Mark and Denise had already left. Henry met me at the front door with a toy in his mouth. He wasn't an excitable dog. He just stood there with the toy and wagged the back half of his body. I brought in my overnight bag, locked the door behind me, and texted Denise. "Here now." "Henry is good," she replied almost immediately. "Thank you so much. Let us know if you need anything." The first night was uneventful. I fed Henry at 6, gave him his pills, let him out in the yard, watched TV at low volume, slept on the couch because Henry got upset when I tried to go upstairs. The house made normal old house sounds. The refrigerator hummed. The wood floors clicked sometimes when the temperature changed. A branch tapped one of the upstairs windows when the wind picked up. Nothing unusual. The next day was quiet too. I worked remotely from their dining room table. Henry slept under it most of the afternoon, twitching in his sleep. I took him on 2 short walks. I watered the plants on the back deck. I sent Denise a picture of Henry with his chin on my sneaker. She sent back a heart emoji. That evening, I checked the locks more carefully. Front door, back door, the small door from the laundry room into the garage. All locked. I remember doing it because I had that vague sitter feeling you sometimes get in someone else's house. Not fear exactly, just awareness. Every sound belongs to a place you don't fully know. I went to sleep on the couch again a little after midnight. Henry slept on his bed near the fireplace. The second day was Saturday. It rained most of the morning. Not heavy rain, just steady and gray. Henry didn't want to go far, so we went to the end of the driveway and back. His paws left dark prints on the kitchen tile. I wiped them with a towel, gave him his pills, and spent the rest of the morning answering emails. Around 2 in the afternoon, the rain stopped. The house got very still after that. There's a certain kind of quiet that happens in suburban houses on weekends. Lawnmowers stop because the grass is wet. Kids are inside. Cars sit in driveways. Everything looks occupied, but nothing moves. I made a sandwich and ate it at the kitchen island. Henry begged politely from 6 feet away. I gave him a small piece of turkey, because I am not as strict as I should be. Then I lay down on the couch. I didn't plan to sleep. I just put a blanket over my legs and turned on a show I had seen before, the kind of thing you use as background noise. I remember glancing at my phone at 3:18. The next time I opened my eyes, the room was dimmer. At first I didn't know what woke me. The TV was still on, but the episode had ended, and the menu screen was playing that soft, repetitive music. Henry was not on his bed. That was the first thing I noticed. Then I heard a sound from the kitchen. A container lid scraping against plastic. It was such a normal sound that my brain didn't understand it as danger right away. I thought maybe Henry had gotten into something. I sat up slowly. From the couch, I could see part of the kitchen through the wide doorway. The refrigerator door was open. A man was standing in front of it. He had his back partly turned to me, one hip leaning against the counter. He was eating something from a clear plastic container with a fork. For maybe 2 seconds, I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe normally. He looked like he belonged there in the most uncomfortable way, not relaxed. Not sneaking, just annoyed, like he had walked into his own kitchen and found the furniture rearranged. He was probably in his late 30s or early 40s, average height, dark blonde hair that was thinning at the crown, a short beard, gray hoodie, jeans, work boots with mud on the sides. He looked tired. He also looked irritated. Henry was sitting by the kitchen table watching him, not barking. That detail has bothered me more than almost anything. I said, "Hello." My voice came out quiet, but he heard me. He turned his head, not his whole body. His expression didn't change much. He said, "You the dog girl?" Not dog sitter, not my name. The dog girl. I pushed the blanket off my legs and stood up. "Yeah," I said. "I'm watching Henry." He closed the fridge with his elbow. He still had the container in one hand and the fork in the other. He said, "They didn't tell me someone was staying here. I didn't know what to say to that." "They told me their son might stop by," I said. He gave a short laugh through his nose. "Of course they did." That made me less nervous for a second, because it sounded like family resentment. It sounded like an adult son being annoyed with his parents. I asked, "Are you Mark and Denise's son?" He looked at me then. Fully. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I used to live here." It wasn't exactly a yes, but in the moment, I took it as one. I asked, "Did you need something?" He set the container on the counter. "I came to get some of my stuff." "Okay," I said. "They mentioned the garage." He stared at me. Then he said, "I know where my stuff is." His tone wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. It was just flat, like I was irritating him by continuing to exist. I remember feeling embarrassed, which is strange now. I was the one who had woken up to a man in the kitchen, but somehow I felt like I had been caught napping at work. I said, "Sorry, I just didn't know anyone was coming today." He picked up the fork again and took another bite from the container. I think it was pasta salad. Something with peas in it. He chewed while looking past me toward the living room. Then he said, "Where are they?" "At a wedding," I said, "in North Carolina." "I know that." Again, flat. I didn't like the way he said it. Henry got up and walked over to me then. He pressed his side against my knee. The man watched him do it. For the first time, his expression shifted. Not much, just a tightening around the mouth. He said, "He's old now." I looked down at Henry. "Yeah," I said. "He's a good dog." The man didn't respond. He walked past me without asking and went toward the hallway that led to the garage and laundry room. As he passed, I noticed he smelled faintly like cigarettes and rain. I stood where I was for a second, holding my phone but not unlocking it. I was trying to decide whether to text Denise. It felt awkward. If this really was their son, I didn't want to send a message like, "A strange man is in your house," and cause a family issue, but I also didn't want to just ignore it. I listened. A door opened in the hallway, then another. Then I heard the laundry room door to the garage open. Henry stayed beside me. The man was in the garage for maybe 10 minutes. During that time, I walked to the kitchen and looked at the back door. It was locked. Then I looked at the front door, also locked. I checked the counter near the sink and saw a key sitting there. Not mine. It had a round black keychain with no label. That made me feel slightly better. He had a key. Mark and Denise said their son had a key. It matched the story well enough for me to talk myself down. When he came back in, he was carrying a small cardboard box. It wasn't sealed. I could see a few old books inside, a tangled cord, and what looked like a framed photo turned face down. He stopped near the kitchen and looked at the container he had been eating from. Then he opened a drawer, took out a lid, snapped it on, and put the container back in the fridge. That also made me feel better in a strange way. It was such a normal, familiar action. He knew the drawers. He knew where things went. He turned toward me and said, "You staying tonight too?" "Yes." He looked annoyed again. "Great." I didn't answer. He shifted the box under one arm and picked up the key from the counter. Then he paused. He looked at Henry. For a moment, I thought he might pet him. Instead, he said, "Don't let him sleep by the front window." I frowned. What? He'll bark at every car. I looked toward the front window. Henry hadn't barked once since I'd been there. The man continued, "They never listen." Then he walked out through the back door. Not the front. The back door. I heard the lock turn from the outside a second later. That meant his key worked on that door. I stood still until I heard a car start. I went to the front window and looked through the edge of the curtain. There was a dark green pickup truck parked along the curb a few houses down, not in the driveway. That bothered me. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even that strange. But if he was their son, why park down the street? The truck pulled away slowly. I didn't get the plate. I wish I had. After he left, I texted Denise. I wrote, "Hi, your son stopped by and got a box from the garage. Just wanted to let you know." I stared at it for a while before sending. Then I added, "He was here around 4:45. I hit send. No answer. That wasn't unusual. They were at a wedding. They had told me they might not respond quickly that afternoon. Still, I didn't feel right. I walked through the downstairs rooms. Nothing looked disturbed. The office door was closed like before. The dining room was the same. The garage was messy, but it had been messy already. Boxes along one wall, a folded treadmill, paint cans. A bicycle with flat tires. Christmas decorations stacked in labeled bins. I didn't know whether anything was missing besides the box. I checked the locks again. Front door, back door, laundry room, all locked. Then I checked the windows. That's something I had never done at a sit before. I felt ridiculous while doing it. Like I had let one awkward interaction turn me into someone unreasonable. At 6, I fed Henry. He ate normally. At 7, Denise still hadn't replied. I considered calling, but I didn't. Again, I didn't want to overreact. That is the part I keep coming back to. How much of keeping yourself safe depends on being willing to look unreasonable? I wasn't willing. Not yet. Around 8:30, my phone rang. It was Denise. I answered right away. She sounded like she had stepped outside somewhere noisy. I could hear muffled music behind her. "Hi," she said. "Sorry, I just saw your text. Someone came by?" "Yeah," I said. "Around 4:45. He said he used to live there." There was silence. Not bad reception silence. Person not speaking silence. Then she said, "Who said that?" "Your son," I said. Another pause. This one longer. Then Denise said carefully, "Our son is in Colorado." I looked at Henry. He was lying on the rug, chewing at one of his paws. I said, "Oh." It was all I could say at first. Denise said, "Mark is right here. I'm putting you on speaker." There was rustling, then Mark's voice. "What happened?" I told them. I tried to keep it simple. "A man came in while I was asleep. He had a key. He ate from the fridge. He said he used to live there. He went into the garage and left with a box." Mark interrupted me. "What did he look like?" I described him quickly. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Gray hoodie, blondish hair, beard, work boots. Denise said, "Slow down." Her voice had changed. It wasn't panic. Not exactly. It was controlled in a way that made me more afraid. She said, "Can you describe him again, more slowly?" So I did. Height, build, hair, beard, clothes, the way he spoke, the smell of cigarettes, the green pickup. When I mentioned the truck, Mark said something under his breath that I couldn't make out. Then Denise said, "Did Henry react to him?" "No," I said. "Not really." He watched him. Then he came over to me. Mark asked, "Did the man touch the dog?" "I don't think so." "Did he say Henry's name?" I thought about it. "No, I don't think he did." Another silence. Then Mark said, "We need you to leave the house." I didn't understand at first. What? Take Henry and leave the house, right now. Denise said, "Take your keys, your bag if it's right there, and Henry, don't go upstairs. Don't check anything else. Just leave." That was when I became really scared, not when I saw the man, not when I learned their son was out of state. It was the way Denise said, "Don't go upstairs," because I hadn't been thinking about upstairs. I had only checked the downstairs. The guest room was upstairs. My overnight bag was at the bottom of the staircase because I had never fully unpacked it. I looked toward the stairs. The hallway light was off. I said, Do you think he's still inside? Mark said. We don't know. Denise said, Please leave now. I clipped Henry's leash on with one hand while holding the phone in the other. My hands were shaking so badly, I had trouble opening the clasp. Henry thought we were going for a walk. He stood there patiently. I grabbed my bag from near the stairs. I didn't look up. I took my shoes from beside the front door and didn't put them on until I was outside. Mark stayed on the phone with me while I locked the front door. He told me not to use the back door. He told me to go to the neighbor across the street, a woman named Carol, and ring the bell. I did. Carol was in her 70s and answered wearing gardening gloves, even though it was nearly dark. She looked confused until she saw my face. I told her I was watching Henry for Mark and Denise, and they had asked me to come over. She let me in immediately. I sat in her front room with Henry leaning against my legs while Mark called the police from North Carolina. Carol made tea I didn't drink. I remember staring at a small ceramic rabbit on her coffee table and trying to make my breathing slow down. The police came about 15 minutes later. 2 officers first, then another car. They walked through the house with Mark on the phone. I stayed at Carol's. From her front window, I could see the police lights moving across the brick of the house. No sirens, just lights, quiet red and blue over and over. After about 20 minutes, one officer came over and asked me to explain what happened. I did. He wrote most of it down. He asked if the man threatened me. I said no. He asked if the man displayed a weapon. I said no. He asked if I was sure he had used a key. I said yes. I had heard the back door unlock when he came in. I realized then that I had not actually heard him come in. I had been asleep, but I heard him lock it again when he left. The officer asked whether I could identify him if I saw him again. I said I thought so. He asked if I had touched the container in the fridge after the man used it. I said no. He nodded like that mattered. Later, Mark and Denise came home early. They drove through the night and got back around 3 in the morning. I was still at Carol's because I didn't want to leave Henry, and Mark had asked if I could stay until they arrived. When Denise walked in, Henry got up faster than I thought he could and pressed himself against her knees. She crouched down and held his head with both hands. Mark thanked me several times, but he looked distracted, exhausted, older than he had looked 2 days before. I expected them to explain everything then. They didn't, not fully. They spoke with the officers in the kitchen while I sat in the living room with Carol. I could hear pieces. Old tenant. Locks changed. Shouldn't have a key. Storage. Years ago. Restraining order. That was the first time I heard that phrase. Restraining order. Nobody said it directly to me at first. When the police left, Denise came into the living room and sat across from me. She apologized several times, not in a dramatic way. She seemed genuinely ashamed. She said, "We should have been clearer." I said, "About your son?" She closed her eyes for a second. Then she said, "We do have a son. His name is Aaron. He lives in Colorado. He was never coming here." I waited. Denise looked toward the kitchen, where Mark was speaking quietly to Carol. Then she said, "There was a man who rented the basement from us a long time ago." I hadn't known there was a basement. She said it had been before they renovated, before they used that part of the house for storage. His name was Paul. He was not family. He rented from them for almost a year when he was going through a divorce. A friend of a friend had recommended him. At first he was quiet and paid on time. Then things became uncomfortable. She didn't give every detail. I didn't ask for every detail. She said he began acting like the house was his. Not just the basement, the whole house. He used their kitchen when they weren't home, moved things around, complained about where they parked, got angry when they had guests. Eventually they asked him to leave. He refused. It became legal, then ugly. Then he was removed. This had happened 8 years earlier. They changed the locks afterward. At least they thought they had. Mark came in during this part and said, "We changed the front and side doors. The back door was replaced a year later. I installed that lock myself." He looked sick when he said it. The police thought Paul may have gotten a copy of the backdoor key at some point after that. Maybe from a contractor. Maybe from a spare key they had forgotten. Maybe from one of the times they had hidden a key outside and assumed nobody noticed. Nobody knew. The more disturbing part was the box. The one he took from the garage. It wasn't random, Mark checked. The box had contained old papers from when Paul lived there. Copies of lease documents, printed emails, a few photographs from damage they had documented in the basement, and notes Mark had kept during the eviction. Mark had stored it and forgotten about it. Paul knew where it was, or guessed, or had been in the garage before. That last possibility made everyone quiet. I asked if he had been in the house recently. Denise didn't answer right away. Mark said, "We don't know." Then Denise said something I still think about, she said. Henry knew him. Not in a fond way. Not in a clear way. Just a factual one. Henry hadn't barked because Henry remembered him. The police did not find Paul in the house that night. They checked upstairs. They checked the basement. They checked closets, bathrooms, the attic entrance, the garage, and the shed. Nothing. But they did find something that made me feel cold in a very specific, lasting way. The guest room door upstairs was open. Denise said it had been closed when they left. That might not sound like much. I know there are explanations. Maybe they remembered wrong. Maybe a draft moved it. Maybe the police opened it and someone forgot. But my overnight bag had originally been upstairs when I arrived. I moved it downstairs the first night because I slept on the couch. If I had slept in the guest room on the second afternoon, like they had offered, I don't know what would have happened. Maybe nothing. Maybe he would have come in, eaten from the fridge, taken his box, and left. But I don't like that he asked if I was staying the night. I don't like that he seemed annoyed by the answer. And I really don't like that he told me not to let Henry sleep by the front window, because Henry never slept there for me. Not once. The police took the food container from the fridge. They also took the lock from the back door. Mark and Denise had every lock replaced the next morning by a locksmith who came out on a Sunday. They paid me for the full stay, plus extra, even though I told them they didn't need to. I didn't finish the job. A relative came over and stayed with them until they figured things out. For a while I checked local arrest records online. I searched Paul's name when Denise eventually told me the last name after I asked if I needed it for the police report. I found a few things. Nothing dramatic. A trespassing charge from years before. A violation of a protective order that had been dismissed. Some civil cases, bad debts. Evictions. The kind of record that doesn't tell you much unless you already know what to be afraid of. As far as I know, he wasn't caught for coming into the house that day. At least not in any way that led to charges. The officer told me that having a working key complicated things. The owners said he wasn't allowed there. He had taken property. But proving exactly how he got in, and proving what he intended, was harder than I thought it would be. That was another thing I learned. A situation can feel very clearly wrong while still being difficult to explain on paper. I stopped dog sitting overnight after that. For a few months, I stopped completely. Then I started doing daytime visits again, but only for people I already knew. I still ask the same questions. Who has access to the house? Is anyone expected to stop by? Does anyone have a key? But now, if someone says, "My son might stop by," I ask for a name, a phone number, a recent photo, a time window. And if they act like that's too much, I don't take the job. I know that sounds strict. I don't care anymore. The part that still bothers me most is not that Paul had a key. It's that, for the first few minutes, I accepted him, because he was irritated, because he knew the kitchen, because the dog didn't bark, because he said one sentence that was close enough to what I expected to hear. I used to live here. That was all it took. Not a convincing story, not a fake name, not a complicated lie, just a key in his pocket, and the confidence of someone who believed he had more right to be there than I did. A few weeks after it happened, Denise texted me. She said they were doing okay. Henry was fine. They had installed cameras outside and changed the garage code. Then she wrote one more thing. She said, "I keep thinking about how he knew we were gone." I had been trying not to think about that, but she was right. Mark and Denise had left the state. Their son was out of state. I was a stranger. And Paul came during a narrow window when the house was quiet, the neighbors weren't outside, and I happened to be asleep. Maybe he saw their car gone. Maybe he watched the house. Maybe he had driven by dozens of times before and never come in. Maybe he planned to come whether I was there or not. I don't know. That is the honest answer. I don't know. What I do know is this. On the printed instruction sheet Denise left on the fridge, underneath Henry's medication schedule, she had written one sentence in blue pen. Please make yourself comfortable. For 2 days I did. And then a man I had never met walked into the kitchen with a key, opened the refrigerator, and made himself comfortable too.